Hello and welcome to America in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. Meta and Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg conceded a huge admission this week when he said the Biden-Harris White House pressured his social media company to censor Americans, including right-leaning media, over issues such as COVID-19 responses and the Hunter Biden laptop. Joining me to discuss this is Casey Harper, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Center Square. Casey, you wrote our story about Zuckerberg's admissions. What are your top takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, not only did I write this story, I've been covering this issue for a couple of years now, and it's slowly unfolded. And what, maybe the average American was too busy to keep up with, what Mark Zuckerberg is up to, but this is the admission that's been a long time coming. We've known for a while, Dan, that the FBI pressured big tech companies during the 2020 election to silence the Hunter Biden laptop story. The FBI told companies like Twitter, like Facebook, that this story, that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. It was a fabricated fake story, and they should silence it if it comes up during the election. So I believe it was October of 2020, the New York Post broke the story about Hunter Biden's laptop, and Twitter locked their account. The media called it basically a conspiracy. Just a few weeks out from the election, of course, that laptop was tied to a greater allegation of that Hunter Biden, possibly at the behest of President Joe Biden, was globetrotting, taking donations essentially for in the name of influencing the Biden family. And so that the big tech shut down that story because the FBI pressured them to. And later it came out, of course, that the FBI, or that the Hunter Biden laptop was verified and totally true, not Russian disinformation. And now we have, in this kind of stunning admission, Mark Zuckerberg, who, leads Facebook, sent a letter to the House Judiciary Committee where he admitted it was a mistake to listen to the FBI, that he wouldn't do it again. And some of these quotes are pretty interesting, Dan. He talks about how the Biden administration repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree, end quote. So pretty interesting. Of course, it's not just the Hunter Biden laptop. COVID-19 was front and center with social media censorship, even questioning the vaccine, questioning masks could get your account, restricted or shut down. And now in the aftermath, we know that there was some harm with vaccines. We know that masks weren't nearly as effective as we were told. For instance, cloth masks do pretty much nothing. And so there was a nuance to a lot of this dogma about COVID-19, but you weren't allowed to have any nuance in your posts. And so we're seeing Zuckerberg admit what people suspected all along. Not only has big tech been censoring people on huge issues like COVID-19, like, the last election, but it was doing so because the federal government, the law enforcement arm of the federal government, was pressuring them to do so.
So since all of that censorship, Casey, Elon Musk has purchased Twitter, renamed it X, of course, has said under his ownership, he will not agree to government pressured censorship. Mark Zuckerberg just this week comes out and says he regrets caving to some of this government pressure, said they'll be smarter going forward, will not cave. How does this change the social media environment when it comes to things like this? Do you think it will have any effect on the election?
Well, hopefully, I think it makes social media companies a little more distrustful of the federal government and willing to have a backbone to stand up to them. We've seen companies and, really wrestle with this issue. Like, should Apple turn over the phone password or a way to unlock the phone of someone who is accused of a crime? Should AT&T hand over phone records of different people? This is an ongoing question, I think, and I hope that these companies get more of a backbone. They're not intimidated. Of course, it will affect the election. These companies have a ton of influence over what posts people see. I mean, people spend a lot more time now on social media than they do on more traditional media outlets. And so social media has a huge impact on what information people consume, what ads they see for any election. what news articles they see and how favorable those news articles are on either candidate. So they have a ton of control. Google, for instance, has been under a lot of scrutiny, Dan. We've talked about this as well. When you Googled certain candidates or certain issues, like for instance, Googling Trump, you might get a favorable story of Kamala Harris pop up. And you might say, well, that wouldn't really influence me. But in the aggregate, over, 100-day election cycle, that will influence people. And in some of these swing states, you're only, a few thousand votes can make all the difference. And so when a company like Google, like these social media companies have this much power, it's not enough to just totally sink a campaign, but it is enough to play in the margins and swing some of these really important states.
Yeah, and when it comes to Google, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of former President Trump, if people were Googling it, they were getting some odd content on something as big as an attempted assassination of a former president and the GOP candidate for president.
Yeah, if there can be such heavy-handed influence on an issue that important that we're paying attention to, just imagine how much can happen on less well-known issues. An energy worker in Pennsylvania is Googling what Kamala Harris really believes about fracking because he's heard mixed reviews. And so what do energy workers in Pennsylvania see, Dan, when their geolocated IP addresses search Kamala Harris fracking? Do they see the same thing as you and I see, either in DC or Chicago? We don't know. It's, possibly definitely not. I mean, they can certainly tailor search results by different things. So those are the kind of things that can really influence an election. And it's almost impossible to keep oversight over it. And of course, the current administration has no incentive to regulate that because these tech companies are very liberal. We know that that's not just an assumption. We know, for instance, the political donations of employees at big tech companies are almost entirely Democrat. We have seen some leading tech, big tech leaders have come out more conservative, like Peter Thiel, like Elon Musk. But the run-of-the-mill Google employee who is setting these kinds of things is very likely Democrat or liberal. And so current administration, many of the bureaucrats who oversee these things who also tend to be liberal, that there's sort of an alignment of interests that support one party over the other, and I'm not sure what much can be done about it.
But definitely an interesting conversation. Casey, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.